The silence in the scriptorium wasn't just the absence of sound, it was something more sentient. Thick, like incense smoke that clung to the back of your throat and refused to leave. Down here, beneath the chapel and past the stone corridor that curved like a ribcage, time didn't tick. It waited. I had copied scripture here for 17 winters, long enough to forget the names of the birds that once flew above my childhood roof, but not long enough to forget the rules. The rules were simple: write what is holy, touch only what has been blessed, and never under any circumstance open what is sealed in wax black. I followed them. I did. My ink was made from crushed gall and iron, my quills trimmed by candlelight and stored in linen. I washed my hands before every word. I whispered prayers over every line. I was not a perfect man, but I was obedient, which is why I hesitated when Brother Matthew brought the wrapped bundle into the room. He didn't say where it came from, he didn't have to. The dust on the cloth, the jagged stitching along the edges, the scent of cold earth still clinging to its folds, all of it told me this book hadn't seen light in decades, maybe longer. He placed it gently on my desk like a swaddled infant and simply said, "The abbot wants it copied. Start with the first chapter, do not read ahead." He left before I could ask anything else. I unwrapped the cloth slowly, revealing a cover that pulsed with strange warmth. The leather was black, not dyed, but black the way rot is black, the kind that grows from within. A symbol had been burned into its center, barely visible unless the candlelight struck it just right. A circle enclosed by thorns, no title, no markings, just the faint scent of something that wasn't dust, something like rust, like iron. Like blood, I told myself it was old. That decay had strange ways of clinging to old things. That fear had no place in this chamber of scripture. I told myself I was being foolish. But as I opened the first page, I swear I heard it breathe, and the dust that rose from the spine didn't float, it fell, like ash, like something had died inside it long ago, and now it waited to be reborn. The page was thicker than it should have been, not parchment, not vellum, it had weight, the way old scars have weight when you run your fingers across them in the dark. My thumb brushed the corner gently, careful not to smudge or crease, and still, I felt something pull back. Not a physical tug, but a resistance, like the page didn't want to be touched, like it was holding its breath. I dipped my quill into ink, whispering the same verse I'd whispered for every copy I'd ever begun. In nomen patris et filii et spiritus sancti. But before I could make the first stroke, something warm bloomed beneath my hand. A drop, dark red, not ink. It beaded on the page where my skin had rested for barely a breath. I pulled back, confused, checking my hand for cuts, none. My fingertips were dry, clean. I looked again. Another drop, then another. The manuscript was bleeding. I blinked. I pressed my palm to my chest, heart racing harder than it had during any sermon, any vigil. Maybe the ink was red, I thought. Maybe the pages were treated strangely. But the liquid didn't spread like ink, it pulsed. It seeped as if the book were a wound and I had just torn it open. My instinct told me to close it, wrap it back up, pretend it hadn't happened, but the air in the scriptorium had shifted. I could feel it, the temperature dropping, the fire in the corner hearth retreating into itself like it feared being noticed. The silence, which had always comforted me, now hung sharp and expectant. I leaned in. There was something written there now that hadn't been before, lines that shimmered with fresh blood, letters forming in a language I didn't recognize. The script curled in spirals, not like Latin, not like Greek, something older or newer or outside time entirely. And beneath the text, one phrase, this time in my own tongue: to copy is to become. I didn't understand it, but I understood the chill that wrapped itself around my spine. The manuscript wanted to be copied, but not merely transcribed. It wanted to be reborn through me. That's when I noticed the blood had soaked into my sleeve. The red had traveled, climbing the fibers of my robe as if reaching for the skin beneath. And for a second, just a second, I thought I felt it move. Something living inside the cloth. I stood up so quickly my stool tipped over, crashing to the stone floor. The sound echoed, shattering the unnatural hush. I waited for someone to come, for Brother Matthew to appear, for a reprimand, for a voice. Anything, but no one came, no footsteps, no breath, only the sound of the fire dying behind me. And the slow, wet sound of the manuscript turning its own page. The page had turned on its own. I didn't see the motion itself. I only saw its aftermath, the curl of vellum still settling, the way a door swings gently after being slammed shut in silence. And what was written there? It wasn't scripture. It wasn't a psalm, nor a parable, nor any gospel I had ever seen. It was a list of names. The letters bled softly, as if written not with ink but from some open, unseen vein. Each name was curled in red, thick and glistening. At first they meant nothing to me. Old names, harrowed names, names from before the founding of our order, maybe even before the first stones of this monastery were laid. I leaned closer, my breath caught in my throat. Near the bottom, fresh, bright, almost wet, was a name I recognized. Brother Matthew, no title, no surname, just that simple, stark, final. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Surely I had read it wrong. Surely it was coincidence. Another Matthew centuries ago, but even as I reached for reason, my eyes wandered lower where the list had not yet ended. And there, at the very last line, a space where the ink still shimmered. Brother Elayan, my name. The letters hadn't been there seconds ago. I would have seen it. I knew I would have seen it. The blood-beating script was still drying. It was writing itself. I stumbled back, heart pounding so hard it echoed in my skull. My breath came short, chest tightening with a pressure I hadn't felt since I was a boy caught in a lie. But this wasn't guilt. It was something worse, a recognition, a quiet understanding that whatever this manuscript was, it wasn't telling me the future. It was deciding it. I looked again, hoping it had vanished, hoping that in the flicker of candlelight my mind had betrayed me. But the name remained, stark, unmoving. My hands trembled as I touched the page, hoping to smear it, to erase it. But instead of blurring, the blood sank deeper into the parchment, as though welcoming my touch, claiming it. Then I heard it, a whisper, no voice, just the sensation of words sliding down the inside of my skull. Ancient syllables spoken without breath, not outside me, but within me. Like a prayer someone else was forcing through my mouth, and my lips moved, unwilling. One must die for one to remain. The candle beside me hissed and went out. I didn't sleep that night. The scriptorium, once my sanctuary, now felt like a tomb with its lid half sealed. I kept the manuscript wrapped in cloth, sealed tight with twine, and set it on the farthest shelf. I dared not bring it back to my cell, but even from across the room I swore I could feel its presence, like a heartbeat pulsing against the stone. Slow, intentional. I scrubbed my hands until my knuckles split, but the stain remained. A deep red smear, not across my fingers, but on the inside of my palm, right along the creases that old monks used to say were lines written by God himself. It didn't hurt, it didn't scab, it simply existed. Like it had always been there. By morning I had made a decision. It had to be destroyed, not returned, not reported, burned, reduced to ash. No prayer, no rite, just fire. I waited until the other brothers were in the chapel for matins. Then I slipped into the garden shed and took one of the old iron braziers used for burning incense. I carried it behind the chapel, past the cloisters and into the courtyard where the light barely touched, and lit the coals beneath with a trembling match. The bundle sat heavy in my arms, not heavy from weight, heavy from dread, like I was holding a sin. I whispered a final benediction, though it felt more like begging, and then I placed the book into the brazier. The fire touched it, licked it, embraced it, but it did not burn. The cloth blackened, curled, and fell away like dead skin, but the manuscript remained untouched, not even a scorch. The flames wrapped around it like wind around a stone, and in the smoke I saw movement, words forming, shifting, writhing beneath the cover. And then a scream. It didn't come from the sky or the monastery. It came from inside the brazier, not loud, not human, something caught between a child's wail and a dying breath, and I did not move, could not. My legs were locked, my breath held hostage. The scream curled up into a whimper, then silence, but the air, it throbbed. When I finally reached for the book again, the iron was cold, the fire had gone, the embers dead. But the manuscript was warm, warmer than before, like a pulse again, like something inside it had just woken up. And there, newly inked across the first page, written in blood that hadn't dried, fire cannot unwrite what is owed. I dropped it, the wind didn't catch it. The book landed with a thud that echoed through the courtyard like a nail being driven into a coffin. Behind me, the chapel bell rang once. It was not the hour. It was not supposed to ring at all. And yet it did, one long, hollow toll. That night I locked the manuscript in the reliquary vault, not with the other books, not in my cell, not even beneath the chapel floor where the old scrolls were kept. I chose the vault for one reason alone. It had no windows. Stone walls, a single iron door, and the absence of light made it feel like a prison strong enough to contain something unholy. And still I didn't sleep. Not because of fear, though it wrapped itself around my chest like a tightening rope, but because of the dreams. They came as soon as I shut my eyes. At first, they were only flashes, images that didn't belong to me. A cold stream running black through a forest I'd never walked. A boy, mouth sewn shut, pointing at a cross made of crows. A candle that burned without fire, melting upward instead of down. I would wake gasping, throat dry, as though I'd been screaming in my sleep. But the worst wasn't the dream itself. It was what I found when I returned to the vault. The manuscript had changed. I was certain of it. I had seen the first page. I had seen the second. The script was sparse, strange, written in a dialect even older than Latin. But now there were more pages, dozens, as though someone had stayed up all night continuing the work. The ink was still fresh, the edges damp, bleeding faintly where the letters curved too tightly, but no one else had been inside, and the handwriting, it was mine, exactly mine, same flourishes. Same minor imperfections, the upward flick on my T's, the heavier weight on S's, a mirror of my scribe's hand. I flipped through, faster now, feeling heat rise in my spine. Each new page whispered as I turned it, like dry lips mouthing prayers I didn't know. Then I found it, a passage circled in dried crimson, words carved into the parchment as if scratched with a bone knife. He who bleeds the word shall speak its voice, and once written the scribe shall be bound not by vow but by vein. I dropped the book again, not from shock but from pain. My palm burned, not fire but movement. The mark from earlier, the one I thought was just a bloodstain, was shifting, slowly curling inward like a spiral. It pulsed with a rhythm not unlike a second heartbeat, and then clear as the chapel bell, I heard a voice, not out loud. Inside, it didn't say a name, it asked a question. Will you continue? I stumbled back, breath shaking, knees threatening to collapse beneath me. I looked around the vault, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows, but there was nothing. Only the book open, waiting, its ink still wet, its pages thirsty for more. I should have left the monastery that night. I should have taken the path through the ash forest, slipped past the bell tower before dawn, disappeared into the fog like a soul never born. But I didn't, because I needed to know. I needed to understand why my hand kept moving when I didn't command it, why the ink seemed to rise from the page and not sink into it, why the words I never intended to write kept coming. The first prophecy appeared sometime near matins. I had sat down just to breathe, to rest my hand after it cramped from too many hours of silent panic, and then the pen rolled toward me, not fell, not dropped, rolled. And before I could stop it, my fingers closed around the quill. The ink pot tipped itself over, and I began to write. I was fully awake, and yet I could not lift my arm. I felt the scratch of parchment beneath my skin, the sting of blood ink tightening as it dried, and the sensation, horrifying and exact, of something guiding me from inside my bones. My hand trembled with urgency, not pain. My breath quickened not from fear, but something more primal. What I wrote was this: the brother who cleanses his hands 12 times will be found before the 13th. His eyes open, his mouth stuffed with salt. He will smile. The moment I finished the sentence, the ink bubbled, literally bubbled on the page. The text shimmered like heat haze on stone, and I smelled the salt, sharp, oceanic, piercing the nose like rot beneath it. That morning they found Brother Raimi dead in the washing basin, eyes wide, smile cracked, tongue missing, salt packed so deep in his throat that his last breath must have tasted like the sea. I dropped the manuscript, I backed away, I vomited. I hadn't told anyone about the writing, about the book, about the voice, but now it knew I saw, it knew I understood, it wanted me to witness, to record, to testify. That night I locked myself in my cell, lit no candle. Left no window open, I wrapped my writing hand in cloth and prayed until my lips bled, but still, the ink returned, not in a pot, in me. It crawled from beneath my fingernails like thread pulled from a rotted hem. By lauds I had written again, unconsciously, one word over and over on the inside of my sleeve: Abbot. And then I knew he was next. I confronted the abbot at dawn, not with accusations, not with desperation, just silence. I stood in his chamber, soaked from the rain, fingers still trembling beneath the bandages I hadn't changed in 2 days. He was kneeling in prayer, as he always did before the bells called the brothers to prime. He didn't turn to face me, he simply said, "It is not your place to carry the burden of vision." But I hadn't told him, not about the blood, not about the words, not about Raimi. He already knew. My voice caught in my throat. "You gave me the book." That made him turn slowly, as if the motion pained him. He stood, robes draping like fog around a statue, and walked to the narrow window slit. The dawn light framed his face with a kind of tired cruelty. "I gave it to you," he said, "because it chose you." I stepped back, he continued. "Do you know what that book is? Not a cursed thing, not a devil's relic. It is a mirror, but one that reflects not what is, only what will be." I swallowed. "But it lies." "No," he whispered, "it tells only truths we cannot bear, and sometimes we make them happen just by writing them." My knees weakened, the prophecy, the salt, the smile, had I brought it forth by recording it. Was it death by witness? I asked him. Why me? He gave the smallest smile, not kind, not cruel, just resigned, because you still believe you can stop it. At that, he turned his back to me. The conversation was over. And the worst part, I felt it, that smile in me too, that sense of quiet surrender, the terrifying pull of inevitability, because later that day I found my quill already dipped in ink, the manuscript was open. And without meaning to, I wrote, "The abbot will kneel again at dawn. But the bell will not toll, because there will be no mouth left to sing." And this time I didn't cry, I just sat there and waited. Because I finally understood what the manuscript was teaching me. It didn't want me to resist, it wanted me to record, and in doing so, become its voice. The next morning I woke before the bell. That shouldn't have been possible. I had trained myself like all the brothers to rise at its first strike. Prime, lauds, vespers, every hour wrapped in rhythm. It was not just habit, it was faith, it was order. The bell was time itself, passed down from the first stones of the monastery. But on this morning the bell did not ring, and I knew what that meant. I ran barefoot across the frost-covered cloister stones, breath clouding in the morning air, the manuscript still open on my desk, bleeding faintly from the edges. I didn't stop to dress, I didn't stop to pray. I reached the chapel just as the first rays of light slipped through the stained glass. The candles had burned down low, their wax puddled like tears on the altar. The silence inside was thick, so thick I could hear the tiny click of my teeth when I clenched my jaw. He was kneeling, exactly as I had written. The abbot's body was slumped forward, hands still folded, forehead resting on the prayer rail. He looked peaceful from afar, almost too still. I approached, unwilling. Every step felt like it added another year to my soul. Then I saw it, his mouth. It was gone, not torn, not injured, just absent. Like someone had smoothed over that part of his face with wax. Skin unbroken, lips erased, silence perfected. He could not ring the bell, he could not sing the hours, he could not warn the others. I turned, bile rising in my throat. My vision swam. The silence of the chapel turned from sacred to suffocating, because this wasn't a prophecy. This was a command. The manuscript hadn't recorded what would happen, it had instructed what must. And I had become the instrument, the vessel through which it etched its will into the world. I stumbled back to my quarters, but even before I reached the threshold, I saw them. Marks, not footprints, marks, handprints. Dozens of them all along the stone floor, smeared in what I thought was ink. But it was, I knew that red, that metallic tang in the air. Blood, but not fresh, it was old, dried. As if it had been waiting there all along, under the surface, only now made visible. Inside my cell, the manuscript was closed, and on its cover, scrawled in a hand that wasn't mine, write the next. And beneath that, a single line. Who sings for the scribe when the bell is silent? There is a kind of terror that doesn't come from what you see, but from what begins to recognize you. When I opened the manuscript again, fingers trembling as though resisting their own movement, the page that greeted me was no longer in Latin. It was in my native tongue. My name was there. Not the name the brothers used, not the name scrawled in the monastery's ledgers, but the one my mother whispered into my ear when I was too small to walk. The name I had buried in silence when I took my vows. I dropped the book, not out of fright, but from the weight of recognition. The ink bled down the page like a fresh wound, each letter trailing behind the next in a slow, deliberate crawl. As though it weren't written but becoming. He who bears the quill shall bear the blame. He who writes shall rot. He who questions shall awaken what must not wake. I told myself to stop. I whispered it like a prayer, like a plea. I tried to close the manuscript, but my hands wouldn't move. They stayed open, cupped like an offering, like I was begging, like I was complicit, and then I heard it. The whisper, not in my ear, not outside the cell. It came from the parchment itself, a sound like dry leaves crushed underfoot, like teeth biting into cloth, a voice without shape threading its way into my mind. Write, scribe. I don't remember lifting the quill. I only remember the sensation, my arm moving, my fingers forming curves and lines, foreign yet familiar. My body wrote of its own accord, as if pulled along by some invisible string. I watched my own hand draft sentences that I had not thought, names I had not spoken, places I had never seen, and yet every stroke felt inevitable. Then I began to write things I knew, Brother Matthew, his secret illness. The one he confessed only once, during a fevered delirium, and which I swore to carry to the grave. Brother Aloin, his cruelty to the novices when the lights went out. Even the abbot's buried doubts about God, about grace, about the silence that stretched too long in his prayers. They were all there, line after line, and worse, what came next, how each would die, where, when, I vomited on the floor. Because I knew what this meant, the book wasn't recording history, it wasn't even predicting it, it was choosing it, and I had become its hand. I did not sleep that night, how could I? The candlelight had long since died, but the words still burned behind my eyes. Even with the manuscript locked in the wooden chest beside my bed, wrapped again in the earth-stained cloth, I could feel it pulsing, like a second heart beating from inside the wood. My ears rang with silence so loud it almost became voice, 1,000 pages whispering in unison. By morning my hands were stained again, but this time not from ink. Blood had seeped through the folds of the cloth, fresh, dark, thick. And I knew I hadn't opened the book, it had opened itself. When I reported this to the abbot, he simply stared, not with disbelief but something worse, understanding. He did not ask me if I was mad, he did not call for the physician. He only folded his hands, bowed his head, and said, "Some books are written by men, others by something that remembers before men learn to write." That was when I realized he had known, not just about the book, about me. About how long I had been writing, about how much I had already transcribed. He placed a hand on my shoulder as if to comfort me, but it felt like a seal, like a sentence. "It chose you," he said. "You may be its last chance to finish." I left his chamber with my knees weak and my mouth full of questions I didn't dare speak aloud. And that night the book was waiting on my desk again. I don't know who placed it there. No one admitted to touching it, but there it lay, open to the final chapter, blank pages, dozens of them, and a single line already written in fresh crimson: "One more truth, scribe, one final offering, you." I wept. I wept like I hadn't since I was a child lost in the woods, calling for a mother who never came. Because I understood, the book didn't just want stories, it wanted truths, it wanted pain, sacrifice, names, and now it wanted the last one. Mine. I stared at the quill, at my hand, at the page, and then I wrote, line after line, pouring the marrow of my soul into that cursed parchment. I wrote my sins, my failures, my doubts. I wrote what I had hidden even from the Lord himself in my darkest prayers, and with each word the ink shimmered like fresh blood in candlelight. The page didn't absorb the words, it drank them. And then the whisper returned, softer this time. "Familiar, you are finished." The ink dried, the warmth left the pages, the scent of rust faded, and when I closed the book for the last time it felt dead, but it wasn't peace that came next, it was absence. My reflection no longer showed in the basin. No one greeted me as I passed through the cloisters. When I called out to Brother Aloyne, he did not respond. When I shouted during Mass, no head turned. They couldn't see me. I hadn't died. But I had been written. I am now part of the book, and one day someone else will open it, and they will bleed too.